Michael Sean, and agus Anna has on be Rashdi Florchik, ex-Gal Saudi McGill, Patrick McGill. I think this is the fourth occasion that I've had an opportunity to address the summer school, the McGill Summer School, and it's a great honour again, and I thank the organisers for continuing to host this school here in what is my own local constituency for the 31st year and going from strength to strength. Politics is an adversarial occupation with political parties motivated by differing ideologies and electoral competition, challenging and criticising the views and policies of their opponents. Those of us in opposition also have an important role in holding the government of the day to account. Opposition for opposition's sake is unhealthy. It is never simply good enough just to oppose. If we're not satisfied with the policies or legislation proposed by the government, then we have a responsibility to put real and credible alternatives on the table. So this evening, I'm going to try and resist the temptation of criticising the government. Instead, what I'm going to do is outline, in the short time available to me, what alternative routes are available to the course currently being pursued by the government. To answer the question of how long and how hard is the route to recovery depends upon the route that one takes. There are no easy solutions. There are certainly no shortcuts. However, there are other routes available, and policies that, if adopted, will make those routes less perilous. For all policymakers, the major challenge at this point in time is to deal with the 3 Ds: the destination, the deficit and the debt. So before we set out on the journey to recovery, we need to be clear on our final destination. For Sinn Féin, the destination is a return to the international borrowing markets at appropriate rates, the regaining of our economic sovereignty, the reduction of our exchequer deficit, and bringing our national debt to a sustainable level. These objectives we share with the government parties and with others. However, reaching that destination is not an end in itself. It must be a means to produce real and sustainable economic and social development in a way that addresses the enormous inequalities that exist in every aspect of our society. Recovery must be more than fiscal targets and debt sustainability models. It must go further than debt to GDP ratios. This state is not a loan loss spreadsheet. Our citizens are not mere statistics or pieces of data. Rather, they are real people, hundreds of thousands of whom are suffering real hardships. Real and sustainable economic and social development can only take place if there is real and sustainable job growth. There can be no recovery, in my view, without jobs. Unfortunately, the government's updated stability programme predicts in the short term that it will be an expert-led but relatively jobless recovery. Indeed, at the completion of the EU-IMF funding programme by the end of 2013, unemployment is projected to be a fraction just under 13%, which I believe is optimistic. A recovery without jobs is a contradiction in terms. The current focus on reducing our exchequer deficit is on cutting expenditure to meet our income. In my view, the primary focus should be the reverse. It should be on growing our income to meet our expenditure. And there is, of course, significant savings to be made in eliminating waste and the excesses in public spending. However, the key factor to growing our income must be getting people back to work. With 443,400 people on the live register today, recovery for them must include the possibility of gaining meaningful employment. That number may rise in the future if future tax cuts or future cuts and tax increases are focused in the wrong areas, as has been the case in the past, which will result in a contraction of the local economy by reducing the spending power of low and middle income families and earners and depressing consumer confidence, which can only lead to further job losses in the domestic sector. While clearly there is a package of tools that need to be employed to get people back to work, central to all of this needs to be state investment in job creation. We simply cannot afford to have almost 500,000 people on the dole, and we cannot afford the social consequences of trying to make it affordable. So the route I choose, the route favoured by Sinn Féin, is to invest, to save and create jobs, to assist small and medium enterprises, to help hard-pressed families and to boost consumer spending. This route proposes a job stimulus in the order of €2.9 billion over the next 12 months, with further injections over the next 3 years. This proposal would use monies from the National Pension Reserve Fund to fast-track labour-intensive infrastructure projects. It would also, in addition to that, inject additional spending power into the local economy in the form of a family stimulus package, which would reverse some of the heavy burden on working families and those on social welfare who were previously cut and who are suffering as a result of the increasing cost of living. Today, there is €14.7 billion available in that fund, the National Pension Reserve Fund, and Sinn Féin's proposals would see us using less than half of that to invest in economic and social stimulus. However, if the current path is continued upon, and if the €10 billion from the National Pension Reserve Fund, due to go into the banks later this week as part of the EU-IMF deal, was no longer available, there is still €4.7 billion left in that fund for investment. Getting people off the dole and back to work can only be achieved through investment in public and private sectors. And in the absence of the private sector willingness, the state must intervene. And the state can create jobs and has done in the past. Using funds from the National Pension Reserve Fund does not increase their deficit by a single cent. And what it actually does is the effects of such a stimulus will see a significant reduction in the exchequer deficit by reducing social welfare spending, by increasing tax revenues and reducing the amount that the state needs to borrow in the future. Clearly, our current deficit is unsustainable, and a job stimulus package alone will not make it sustainable. So there is a clear need for increased revenue raising and reduced spending. And the key question is where to cut and where to raise taxes. Last year, in the budget, I outlined €1.5 billion worth of cuts across a range of expenditure. And Sinn Féin, in preparation for Budget 2012, will put forward other similar plans later on this year. But the key issue in all of that, and the key consideration must be to protect those who have the least and to protect the services on which they rely. There is also, in my view, a need for an honest debate around our taxation system. We have consistently had one of the lowest tax takes as a percentage of GDP in the Euro 27. We share the dishonourable position with the states like Romania and Bulgaria. At 29%, it is nearly 8 points clear of the EU average and 6 points below what the OECD ceiling is for a low-tax economy. I believe that this has to change. While income tax, VAT and business taxes compare favourably with EU averages, we fail when it comes to tax breaks, taxes on assets and social insurance. If people want Romanian or Bulgarian quality public services, then there is simply no need to change. But I believe that people deserve better, and I believe there is a need for change. And to deliver that change requires a programme of tax reforms that would bring tax revenues up to 35% of GDP within a single term of government. Such reform must be carried out in a way that is fair, transparent and conducive to economic growth and social development. And crucially, it also provides one of the key elements of our strategy for dealing with the issue of debt, to which I will now turn. Alongside the alternatives that I have talked about, the alternative route for addressing the unemployment crisis and reducing the deficit, I believe that there is a need for an alternative strategy for dealing with our growing debt crisis. The focus of this alternative strategy would be to actively reduce the level of debt. Side issues such as interest rate and longer maturities, while welcome, would not be our main focus. The key issue would be to implement a plan to reduce the national debt from the projected €200 billion that it will reach in 2014. And it is worth just remembering and noting that over €64 billion of that €200 billion is not sovereign debt, but private banking debt underwritten by this state by bank recapitalisations and the infamous Anglo-Irish Bank promissory note. So reducing this debt burden must start with separating out what is real sovereign debt from private banking debt. To date, we've heard a lot of figures about billions being pumped into banks, but to date there has been 18.4 billion has been spent recapitalising the banks. 15.4 billion of that was spent and injected into the banks during the lifetime of the previous government, while over the next number of months and years it is proposed to inject a further €45.9 billion into the banking system, beginning this week with an €18 billion injection of your money to those banks. Paying back this huge debt means investing less in public services and job creation. It means paying for hundreds of thousands of ordinary people. Our national debt, in my view, is simply unsustainable. Repaying the interest on this debt is equivalent to half the total of income tax for every worker in the economy. Put very simple, that means that every cent of tax you pay, working Monday, Tuesday and half-day Wednesday, is going to pay the interest on our national debt. Reducing this debt requires negotiating a loss-sharing agreement with the ECB on the €30 billion Anglo-nationwide promissory note, the full cost of which will exceed €45 billion when the interest is included. And the ECB must acknowledge its role in creating the Eurozone crisis through its failure to adequately enforce its regulatory authority on interbank lending at the height of the boom. In doing so, it must accept the need for it to shoulder part of the burden of resolving the crisis. And then there is also the issue of the €60 billion of bonds held by the 6 banks. While 20 billion of these are currently covered by the blanket guarantee, 40 billion is not. Of this, 20 billion is unsecured, and the taxpayer should not be paying these private debts. There is no moral justification for us to be bailing out the gamblers who have no guarantee from this state and who are not secured. Last week, European leaders accepted burden sharing as part of the solution for Greece. It must be part of the solution for Ireland. Politics, I heard you, is all about choices. Governments always have alternatives. The real question is whether they have the political will to make the necessary policy changes. From our part, Sinn Féin wants to see an Ireland that is prosperous, supportive, sustainable and equal. We want a model of social and economic development that supports all individuals and all communities to live bigger and better lives. We favour equality of condition over equality of opportunity. The policies of the last Fianna Fáil government not only bankrupt the state, but it also left a deep legacy of inequality. They fostered an economy that was greedy, ugly and unsustainable. The policies that drove that government continue to form government policy today in the form of the Programme for National Recovery and the EU IMF austerity programme. These policies, in my view, will prolong the recovery and will place an unnecessary degree of hardship on those most vulnerable in our society. So the roadmap that I have outlined may have its own twists and turns, and all of these will have to be negotiated upon when we reach them. However, the prize at the end of this destination is so much greater. This is the route that I believe that our government should travel. This is the route that I believe that we should all travel together, proudly wearing our green jerseys. And some may dismiss this as unachievable, just as the same way that they dismissed my calls for our EU partners to stop profiting on the EU loans that they were making available to us. They told us at that time that a 0.6% reduction was the best that we could expect to achieve, until the market's reaction in Spain and Italy forced an end to EU profiteering on these loans. So the sooner that this government abandons its current route, the better for us all. If and when they do so, I and my party will work with them, will walk with them. If they do so, if they do not, we will continue to oppose and expose their broken promises. But most importantly of all, we will continue to promote credible and radical policy alternatives in the hope of leading our country back to the road of equitable, sustainable, social and economic recovery.